We can honestly probably go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah McLean, and I'm an AmeriCorps member through Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. I wanted to thank you guys for joining us tonight to see this program focused on the spooky health effects of lead. So we're going to talk about lead and the effects on our community historically and through today. So just a few reminders for everyone. Those of you who are online will have their cameras off and microphones muted so you can't be seen or heard. Any questions you may have can be put into the Q&A section towards the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Additionally, the webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything or wish to watch it again, you will be able to find it in a few weeks posted to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube channel. Lastly, there will be a short poll towards the end of the webinar. If you could please fill out the poll before you leave, we'd greatly appreciate it as it helps us hold and improve future events. So with that being said, allow me to introduce our speaker. Noelle Smith is a community health educator working with the Douglas County Health Department. She has been in the position since 2022. She graduated in 2021 from UNL with a major in nutrition and health sciences, focusing on the community health and wellness option, and a minor in psychology. So with that, I will go ahead and let her take over.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. Like she said, I'm Noelle Smith. I'm a community health educator with the Douglas County Health Department, the lead poisoning program. So today we're going to be discussing lead poisoning, how it affects children, the environmental justice issues we see in Omaha surrounding lead poisoning, as well as Douglas County services and how we can keep our families safe. And yes, I'll have answers at the end, so don't forget that. All right. So what is lead poisoning? So lead is a metal that's naturally found in the ground, and lead poisoning is an illness that is caused by either breathing in something with lead, like lead dust, or swallowing something with lead in it, like soil or lead paint. Lead is very common in our environment. However, it can cause serious harm to people, especially small children. It has the potential to be deadly as well. And there's no safe level of lead in the blood, and those effects can be permanent, especially in children. So that's why we do things like this, try to continue to educate the community about the legacy of lead poisoning and how it continues to poison our children in the community. So you may be wondering, how do we know if we have lead in our bodies? So the only way to know is through a blood lead test. So all children in Omaha should get tested every year until they're 7 years old. And this is because children under 7 are just the most vulnerable to lead poisoning. And so that's why we recommend that. In 2021, the CDC actually lowered the blood lead reference value to 3.5 micrograms per deciliter. So 3.5 or above is considered elevated. So if a child tests for lead, it's 3.5 or above, they have an elevated blood lead level. And so like we talked about before, there's no safe level of lead in the blood, however, so we really want that number to be as close to 0 as possible. Because lead can affect multiple body systems, including the brain, liver, kidneys, and the bones. And studies continue to show us that there's a profound effect on the body, linking it to health issues later in life, including heart disease, cancer, or even early death. So a little bit more about how it affects the body. It just goes in more detail here. So lead especially affects the brain and nervous system. So we can see those effects including slow growth, speech, language, and hearing issues, lower IQ and educational performance, nervous system and kidney damage, learning difficulties, as well as behavior problems. Lead can affect adults as well, as you kind of see in this graphic. It can cause things like memory loss, lack of concentration, high blood pressure, decreased kidney function, even some fertility troubles and spontaneous miscarriage. But our program focuses more on the kids under 7. Like we said, they're just the most vulnerable. We see they have more of that permanent damage due to lead poisoning that can affect them, for the rest of their lives. So there's been some recent studies linking lead poisoning to mental health issues. So I'll kind of show you the few ones that really stick out for us. So A study done in 2013, scientists actually engineered mice with the human gene for schizophrenia and exposed them to lead early in their life, and it caused structural changes that were consistent with schizophrenia because of that lead exposure. That was on mice. And then in New Zealand in 2019, they did a cohort study over 579 children. So there's a lot of kids that they followed for over 30 years. And so they showed the greater lead exposure that they had in childhood is associated with a greater psychopathology across the life course with difficult like personality traits in adulthood. And then lastly, the study that was done in 2021, the findings showed lead exposure linking it with autistic symptoms and decline in intelligence scores, social interaction, memory, and language. So it's, you know, again, really affects children through their whole life and really the mental health issues we're starting to see. So this next slide kind of talks about the learning impacts that lead can have on children. So in that first row, like we talked about, 3.5 is considered elevated, but even at less than 3 micrograms per deciliter, we're starting to see decreased end of test grade scores. And then it kind of keeps going up. So at the 4 micrograms per deciliter, there's an increased likelihood of having learning disabled classification in elementary school. At 5, children are 30% more likely to fail 3rd grade reading and math tests. And, you know, the levels go up, the more we see children struggling with their learning. And then at that above 25 micrograms per deciliter, which is really high, studies show that we see about $500,000 in excess annual special education and juvenile justice costs. So it really has an effect on our entire community. And this slide kind of talks more about that. So not only affects children obviously in their lives, but it can affect their families and our entire community. So childhood lead poisoning, kind of like we see in this dark blue area, can cause things like speech disorders, childhood delinquency, lower IQ scores, behavioral disorders, crime in adulthood, and even other health issues. This has a direct effect on a child's future. And so then you see in that light blue, the cost to a child's future can include academic failure, lack of employment, criminal records, and lifelong health problems. And then the cost to society. So then we see increases in healthcare costs, joblessness, and more special education and juvenile justice costs. And so other studies have showed fully eradicating lead in our communities. It would benefit all of us. However, nationwide, it would probably cost about $500 billion to fully get rid of lead. So that's going to be hard to do. And so we have to start to focus on smaller communities. How can we get rid of lead or at least spread more education and information? So next we'll talk about the Omaha Lead Superfund site. So Omaha has a particular deep history with lead in our communities. The Omaha Lead Superfund site was created in 1999 by the EPA to address high levels of lead in the soil. So Omaha actually has the largest residential lead Superfund site in the whole country. So it includes 11 zip codes, which you can see on the map. And so most of these zip codes are east of 72nd Street. So that's going to include North Omaha, South Omaha, Midtown, downtown, even parts of like the Dundee area in Omaha. And of those 11 zip codes, 96% of the housing stock was built before 1970. So now you not only have the soil, but you also have older homes that have lead-based paint, which we'll talk more about. But it's just an additional risk factor for these children. And so there's approximately 222,000 people living in these zip codes, of which 27,000 children are 7 years and younger. Our screening numbers, I think I'll talk about, we're at about 17,000. So there's 10,000 children in Omaha that aren't getting tested that probably need to be. So here you'll see these pollution factories. So these factories were located along the Missouri River, and these are what caused the high amounts of lead in the soil in Omaha. So the Asarco lead smelting plant, they have the largest operation, and they were found to be primarily responsible for the pollution, financially especially as well. It was open for over 125 years and it didn't close until 1997. And so for 125 years, this factory put lead pollutants into the air, in these smokestacks that you see into the air, and it settled into the soil. And so that's why we have the largest Superfund site, because we had all these factories downtown along the river. So that's kind of the soil part of it. Another large aspect of lead poisoning is talking about lead-based paint. So this is a timeline that shows the most important dates in terms of lead-based paint history. I won't go in every single date. I think the most important ones to look at are in 1904, child lead poisoning was linked to lead-based paints, but it wasn't until 1978 that lead-based paint was banned. So you have 74 years where these paint companies knew that their paint was causing lead poisoning, but did nothing. And so you can imagine all the children being born into homes with lead-based paint, and in Omaha with lead soil. So there was, a lot of children getting poisoned where, if certain things were different, they wouldn't have been. And so because of that, we still see that legacy today of there's still children getting poisoned from lead-based paint and from soil. So there's other sources of lead as well. We talked about the paint and the soil, and most children are poisoned in Douglas County by lead-based paint or lead-based dust, which I have there, which is basically the dust that's created from paint. So when lead paint starts to chip and peel, that's when it becomes hazardous and it can create dust. So you might on windowsills or doors, creates dust, and for little ones, they put their little hands on there, now they have the dust, and now they're touching everything. That's usually how they get lead poisoning. So that's one. The second highest source of exposure is actually imported spices. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but yes, that's the second highest. And other sources include water, usually from leaded service lines or old faucets. It can be in keys, inexpensive children's toys and jewelries, and then some lead glazed ceramics, certain metals like bronze or brass, and then some other imported products, including makeup, could be some face paint or home remedies that are specific to certain cultures. Other sources can be hobbies or workplace hazards. So if a parent, for instance, engages in activities like indoor, outdoor target shooting, they do fishing, they make fishing sinkers, or they make stained glass, if they're not careful or hygienic enough, they could expose themselves or take it home to their families. It's kind of what we call take-home lead. And then some workplace hazards exist as well. So construction workers, painters, mechanics, gun range operators are more likely to be exposed to lead in their workplace. And if they're not careful, like we said, they could expose their children, when they get home. So kind of reducing those risks, these ones in particular, it's just keeping clean in general around lead is really important. So washing hands often, changing clothes before you come home and you're interacting with your family, washing hands especially before you eat, taking shoes off, showering, all those things will, decrease the likelihood that you could expose your family. So we'll get into the spices here. So spices are an emerging source of exposure of lead that we've seen. So like I said, it was the second highest source of exposure last year. So it's typically imported spices that are either being brought into the country by refugee or immigrant families, or it could be spices that you might buy at any ethnic grocery stores locally. And so the populations obviously most at risk here is our refugee and immigrant children who might eat these spices almost every day, almost every meal. It's a part of their, food culture. And so we've seen, we're going into homes where they could live in newer homes. They could live outside of the Superfund site. They're having the spices. And so at the health department, we do have the capacity to do testing to ensure the safety of use. So, if there is a child who's poisoned, we suspect it could be spices, we might take samples and have that tested. for them. However, there's ones that are typically leaded when we do test them. That includes kind of more colorful spices like turmeric, curry, masala, cumin, chili powder, even some other one like herbs like oregano or thyme that we've seen. So like I said, it's usually these ethnic grocery stores or ones that are being brought from other countries. However, we've also seen, we've tested spices that come from bigger brands like McCormick or Great Value, and those are you can buy at Walmart or Hy-Vee. Those we've seen be leaded too. So like I said, there's ones that are kind of typically more leaded, but there's no need to panic. You don't have to panic. I would say, give them to your children under 7. And if you do, you have to make sure they're getting tested regularly. And it's really when you're eating these spices very regularly, almost every single meal, lead, accumulates in the body. So you're going to see it start to accumulate over time. So this is kind of a sort of a summary page of the risks of lead exposure. So we tell families and healthcare providers that factors that increase the risk of lead exposure include really being a child under 7 in Omaha, that there's a risk just living here and being under 7. Children that live in the Superfund site, being these 11 zip codes here. Children that live in a home built before 1978. Children who eat imported spices, and then children whose parents might be exposed to lead at work. So this next slide shows a map of Douglas County. We're going to kind of go into some more demographic information now. So the yellow shaded area here is the lead Superfund site, so those 11 zip codes. And so it shows the confirmed blood lead levels in each zip code. Last year we had 298 confirmed blood lead levels. Obviously you can see most of them are in the Superfund site. With the most being in 68111, which is north, 68107, which is south, and 68131, which is also north. Children living in North and South Omaha, they're more likely to just be exposed to soil, obviously. They're more likely to live in homes where there's more chipping and peeling paint. They're more likely to not have home ownership. So now you're also dealing with landlords who might not be upkeeping the house, and which is causing the paint to maybe chip and peel. And I think I forgot to mention, you can live in a home that with lead-based paint, as long as it's stabilized. So it becomes a hazard when it's chipping and peeling. So when paint starts to chip and little kids either pick at it or it creates that dust, that's when it becomes hazardous. So you kind of see more of that, and unfortunately in homes in those areas. And so obviously if the kid breathes it, that dust in, they touch things, they're more likely to get poisoned. So then we also break down our cases by race and ethnicity. So, it's obvious here that the majority of children being lead poisoned are children of color, with 34% being Asian, especially our refugee population, 33% being Hispanic, and 14% being Black. So it's definitely, it is a socioeconomic, issue that we see. Lead doesn't affect all children the same. Certain children are more at risk than others, unfortunately. This also shows we, also see the different languages spoken by the residents that we see. So most speak English, but we do have a lot in Spanish. We had about 7% speak Pashto, which is spoken by Afghani residents. 2% speak Korean. We have several others that speak Burmese, Dari, Nepali, Arabic, Swahili. And as far as our staff, we do have 3 Spanish-speaking staff who do a really good job serving the community, and so it's really nice to have that. We also do have a staff member who speaks Nepali, and so that's just really helpful. And then otherwise, if there's languages that we need, we use over the phone interpretation that we have through Douglas County, and we also have many educational materials that are made in different languages, which is something that we pride ourselves on. We have lots of things to be able to get the information out to families, no matter what language you speak, no matter where they live, no matter what they look like. So yes. So this also shows the 2022 suspected sources of exposure. So as you see, like we talked about, most are lead-based paint and lead-based dust. Second highest is the imported spices. Then we have soil. Then 6% of cases are being from foreign exposure. So for instance, if children are traveling out of the country, or maybe our refugee or immigrant children were exposed in their home countries before coming over, that's kind of what that means. So then they come back, they get tested for it, and then they have higher levels. And then we also have some cases where children exposed by keys, the occupation of parents, and other cultural influences. And just kind of another example of those cultural influences. We've had like children who maybe there's certain cultural makeup. So small children might, like in some Afghani communities, they use like a kohl eyeliner on the children. But we've tested it and it's high in lead. And so they're, you know, and it's a part of their culture, so it's hard, but they're putting this on the children, and the children are getting lead poison. We know what we know about lead poisoning, so we have to obviously educate them about that. So as far as children getting rid of lead in their bodies, or kind of protecting children from lead, there's not like medicine that you take if you have lead poisoning, not unless you're at a dangerously high level. Then you would have chelation therapy, and basically heavy metal detoxing. So for the children who aren't at, and most children aren't at that dangerous level, and nutrition is extremely important. So you want to have a diet that's high in calcium, iron, and vitamin C. That'll help the body not to take lead and store it in the bones, because that's where it's stored. It'll kind of help remove that lead and, you know, get it out of the body. Obviously, too, we want to limit the amount of sugar and fried foods you give to children. Just that's for any health reason, but to lead, that makes a difference. You know, children should be eating 3 balanced meals. And again, no amount of lead is good for nutrition. 0 lead, we don't want it. So, well, Douglas County Health Department, our lead program has several services that we provide for the community. So one is our pre-1978 inspection. So these might be for families who they live in an older home and they have kids under 7, or maybe it's a grandparent who has their grandkids over often. They want to have their home tested. So we do offer those. We also have our EBL, or elevated blood level inspections. Those are for children who have, you know, an elevated blood level. So we're going in there and doing, you know, an inspection, questionnaire, education, kind of an investigation to try to see where this lead is coming from and how we can remove the hazards as quickly as we can. We also have clearance inspections. So those are for maybe owner-occupied homes. So for example, a landlord, they were told they had to do work on a house, they had to fix the lead-based paint hazards. So then we have to go in and make sure that all the work is done to address all those hazards. And we also have our interior lead desk program. So this program is available for residents who have had their soil remediated by the EPA or the city of Omaha. So a little bit, so that's kind of the city of Omaha side of things. But what they do is, so the contamination that we've had in the soil, through the EPA, you can have it remediated for free if it's above 400 parts per million in the soil. So if it's been remediated, it's been replaced, then you qualify for this interior lead desk program, where you'll receive a free HEPA vacuum, as well as we do dust wipe sampling. So we'll take 4 dust wipe samples of maybe like a windowsill, floors, like in a walkway where people are, you know, traveling often, and then we'll have that tested in a lab to see what the lead level concentrations are. But that, again, that only applies if you live in the Superfund site and if you've had your soil remediated by the EPA or the city of Omaha. So as far as windows are a really big hazard when it comes to lead-based paint, because there's so much friction. Because if you're opening it, things are being blown in. Even in older homes where there's just a natural draft in windows, that can become a hazard. So it's always important to keep your windows clean. A lot of people forget about this, especially if you live in an older home. You have to make sure that you're cleaning out that window sill, and the window trough being where that window sits. And so a lot of times, as you can see in those pictures, paint chips will collect. There's lots of dust in there, and so it's good to properly clean it with, either a HEPA vacuum, vacuuming up all those paint chips, and then wet dusting. So wet dusting is really important when it comes to lead dust as well. Not using like a little duster that can kick things up and you breathe it in. You want to use like a wet paper towel, things like that. So it's just important to know because windows are always a source, just a big hazard when it comes to lead-based paint. So cleaning as well. So like I talked about, just staying clean is really important when it comes to lead poisoning. So I won't go too much into detail here, but the biggest things when it comes to cleaning are, again, not dusting or dry sweeping or like beating rugs, making sure you're mopping and using like a Swiffer, and just not using materials that will scratch or disturb paint. So yes, and this also goes for bathtubs too. Sometimes, I didn't mention this, but sometimes bathtubs can have a leaded glaze on them, older ones, so also not, you don't want to use anything abrasive on there, using, things that aren't scratch or, disturb paint. So as far as lead in water goes, so like we talked about, lead in water is another source of exposure in children. There's a risk of lead exposure due to old service pipes, older plumbing, or old faucets. You can't see, you can't smell, you can't taste lead in the water. So the only way to know is to have it tested. So you can call MUD or your utility service provider to find out if your residence has leaded service pipes. And you can also have free water testing done. So that's a really important resource for the community, just to make sure your water is safe. Other precautions you can take when it comes to protecting yourself against lead in water is only using cold water from your tap when it comes to cooking or drinking. Hot water just tends to disturb lead in pipes, and there's more likely to be higher concentrations of lead in water when it's hot, coming from the tap. And if your tap hasn't been used in more than 30 minutes, for example, it's been sitting all night, it's a good idea, if you know that you have older pipes, to let it flush. And so whether it's running your faucet, running your bathtub, just for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, will just allow things to be flushed out that have just been sitting in those potentially leaded pipes all night. We also, so Douglas County Health Department, in partnership with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, we provide free water testing kits to daycares, childcare facilities, and schools who would like to have their water tested. And so it's a resource we'd like to see a lot more people, utilize. So definitely want to get the word out about that because it's a really good resource. All right, so lastly, I kind of just have some big do's or don'ts when it comes to protecting yourself and especially children from lead. So obviously keeping dust is, not having as much dust in your home as possible, dusting off windowsills, woodwork, other surfaces, leaving shoes at the door is to not track any potentially leaded dirt that could be outside. Washing your hands, washing children's hands, especially before eating or sleeping, and washing toys. Having healthy meals and snacks that are high in iron, calcium, and vitamin C. And for our don'ts, don't let children touch or eat chipping or peeling paint. Don't give imported spices or candies to children under 7. Don't let them play in bare soil. Don't let them put children's jewelry like necklaces or bracelets in their mouth. And don't let kids play with keys. It's safe to assume all keys have lead, so don't let them play with keys. Alrighty. So yeah, here I just have some helpful links. So our website is the first one, and then we also have fightled.org, which is our newer, kind of more interactive site where you can put in submissions if you're interested in inspections or whatever it might be. We also have information from the EPA, the CDC, and then omahalead.org is where you can go to see if your property has been tested for lead or remediated by the EPA or the city of Omaha. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noelle. Awesome. So I'm just gonna send out that poll really quick, and then we're gonna take some questions, you guys. Just stop sharing. Oh, I'm literally blind. Okay, perfect. So I will go ahead and send that out now. And then here are some of the Q&A questions. If you guys would like, feel free to send some questions to us and we'll go ahead and get that, we'll go ahead and get those answered. Here we go.
Do you have more information on like the imported spices? Like, is there certain regions that tend to have more? Like, if I got spices and they said like imported from, I don't know, like Bangladesh, they have more lead than.
Yeah, so there are more regions. Typically Southeast Asia is where we're seeing the most spices be leaded. But it's hard to say. It usually happens during either the manufacturing process where lead enters these spices. So it could be they might be laying out or drying in a place where there could be lead dust in the air. Sometimes lead's added for color in certain spices. So it kind of depends, but yes, we do see mostly in Southeast Asia and a little bit in South America where these spices are leaded. But we do have more information. We have a brochure on our website that talks all about spices, so visit it, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
You mentioned blood tests. Are those free for residents?
Yes, so, well, typically they're free. They're free with Medicaid for children. So when children are on Medicaid, they'll get a free lead test. Typically, they're free with insurance as well. And we also do offer lots of free screening around the community. So, you know, you can find us at a lot of community outreach events, and we do have staff that will do finger pricks for kids if parents would like. And we'll have, we can have that ready in just 3 minutes if parents want to have their kids tested. But yes, usually at the doctor, that's a free service, but we do have a lot of free options in the community as well.
I'm gonna be asking a lot of
That's
questions. Do you find people using the resources, or are you still having issues reaching people? And if so, which group of people do you have harder time?
Yeah, I think we find that people are really open to the resources that we're finding. We're in the community a lot. A lot of people know about us, but still too many children are getting lead poisoned every year. A lot of what we're trying to work better at is our relationship with healthcare providers and making sure that they're doing enough testing. Because if they're doing enough testing, then we'll know, you know, have a better idea of all the children that might be exposed. I would say, as our numbers show, lately we've seen an increase in lead poisoning in our Hispanic population. So we're really trying to focus our efforts there right now, kind of seeing why there's an increase and what more education that we need to do for them.
And then we did have a couple questions in the chat. I pulled them up for you.
Yes, so one question is, do any medications or nutritional supplements contain lead? Yes, actually, that's interesting. We just got sent an article today about turmeric supplements being leaded. So a lot of people take turmeric supplements. It can have really good benefits. However, it can have lead in it. Like I talked about, that's one of the bigger ones that tends to have lead. So as far as supplements go, and I won't go too much into that, it's not exactly my place. However, supplements aren't regulated by the FDA, and so you should always be careful when you're taking supplements. As far as medications, we don't see too many of those, but definitely the supplements can. Yes. The second question in the chat is, how do you make sure your kids don't have lead poisoning if you live and the zip code is affected, if they're over 8 and they've never been tested? That's a good question. So if they're over 8 years old, typically we don't see as much lead poisoning because they're not doing as many behaviors as they once did as young kids. So, for example, we see most children being lead poisoned around 2 or 3 or even 1 because they're crawling everywhere, because they're putting everything in their mouth. They're not really washing their hands as much at that age. And they're home a lot. And so as kids get older, maybe they're at school more, and that's honestly sometimes a good thing in terms of lead poisoning. You know, they're starting to create those better habits, their bodies are getting stronger. So we don't see as much lead poisoning. Now, again, we have some kids that if you're obviously heavily exposed, you can get lead poisoned at any age. So again, just making sure you're having that nutritious diet at any age. You know, for kids that are older, not playing in the dirt. You know, making sure to keep your homes free of chipping and peeling lead paint. And by free. It can just be as simple as stabilizing it with a fresh coat of paint, you know, not feeding them those spices, all those things will help. Yeah, but we definitely don't see as many children eat or overeating, which is a good thing.
You mentioned the like, so if a house has been remediated,
Mhm.
they can get like a vacuum?
Yes.
Again, how did that work again?
Yeah, so yeah, if your home has been, if it had 400 parts per million or higher, it would have been remediated or can be remediated by the city of Omaha and the EPA. So once that has happened, then you would qualify for that free HEPA vacuum. So the HEPA vacuum is just for helping to keep your home cleaner, and in case there could be any like residual lead dust that could be in your home from the remediation processes. And so yeah, we'll give you the vacuum, and then we also do that dust wipe sampling. We'll test the levels of lead in your dust.
So I know with the water mains, I think the city of Omaha will or has been replacing like the water mains. But then there's the direct service line, which the homeowner owns. What sort of, do you know of any like funding or resources homeowners can use to help alleviate that cost?
I do, well, I don't, it's kind of in the works, so I know that there has been a grant that, and I know the Biden administration also has been, you know, created this money to replace lead service lines in communities, and I know that the state has also received funding for that. Don't know all the details, but I know that exists. So I would say, yeah, and call your utility service provider as well. They'll have like a lot of information about your service lines, the possible replacement of them. But yes, I know that's in the works. And so hopefully that'll start to kind of be rolled out over the next like 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years maybe.
There is, so from the Superfund site, I think there's like 500 or so homes left, last time I checked, from like 2020 that still need to be remediated or need
Yes, that's
contact.
right. That's right.
Do you know why they haven't been remediated? Is it just the homeowners don't want it?
Yeah, so yeah, they kind of did a lot of this testing in the early 2000s, and so people do have the option to opt out. You know, sometimes you don't want people disturbing your yard, and that's totally understandable. But yes, there still are some left, and with the turnover of home ownership that occurs, some people just didn't even know that their home hasn't been tested, and maybe they just bought a new home and they didn't know. So that's why we say, you know, go to the omahaled.org, see if your property has been tested. And if it hasn't, you can contact the city of Omaha for that. Yeah, and the city of Omaha does a lot of outreach for that purpose, exactly.
Perfect. We'll take any other final questions in the chat if anyone has any. Otherwise, we do have, I have the email and everything shared again. We can go back to those links if we'd like for people maybe, if anybody would like that. But otherwise, I would love to thank you, Noelle. Thank you so much for coming out and talking to us about this.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's an important topic, so I'm glad it's, you know, continuing to be spread around the community.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much for joining us as well.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes. All right, have a good night.
Thank you.